I am Julian, and I am 32 years old. After 3 agonizing years of battling what I thought was severe male infertility, my own wife sat across from me at our dining room table and casually suggested we use my golden child brother's sperm so she could get pregnant. While I was staring at my dinner plate, feeling like an absolute failure of a man, my parents actually chimed in to aggressively support her twisted idea. My mother looked me dead in the eye and said it was the perfect logical solution because at least the baby would have Preston's strong genes, maintain our family legacy, and secure the bloodline. They humiliated me right in my own home, treating my deepest, darkest emotional insecurity like a minor logistical issue that needed to be outsourced to the family favorite. But there is one massive detail none of them knew at that exact moment. I had already visited a different medical specialist across town, and I had my real, unaltered medical records securely locked in my leather briefcase upstairs. And now they are the ones financially ruined, their reputations completely destroyed in our community, and begging for a second chance they will absolutely never receive. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little arrangement piece by piece, hit that like button if you firmly believe the truth always comes to light, no matter how hard people try to bury it. And do not forget to let me know exactly where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let us go back to the exact moment where this absolute nightmare officially began. The air in my dining room was incredibly thick and suffocating that Sunday evening. It was a standard, mandatory family dinner, the kind we hosted once a month to keep up suburban appearances and satisfy my mother's need for control. We lived in a strict HOA community, and maintaining the illusion of the perfect American family was my mother's absolute favorite hobby. These monthly dinners usually ended the exact same way. My mother would spend an hour criticizing my lawn care, my choice of career, or my lack of a recent promotion at the logistics firm where I worked. My father would eventually retreat to the living room, falling asleep in my expensive leather recliner while the rest of us cleaned up the massive mess in the kitchen. Victoria, my wife of 5 long years, had been unusually quiet all day long. She spent the entire afternoon meticulously preparing a massive roast, but she was pushing her own food around her porcelain plate, actively avoiding any direct eye contact with me. I honestly thought she was just exhausted. We had spent the last 3 years in and out of various high-end fertility clinics, draining our joint savings accounts, liquidating parts of my stock portfolio, and slowly eroding the very foundation of our marriage. Every single negative pregnancy test felt like a physical blow to my chest. I was the one carrying the immense, suffocating guilt. According to the thick, heavily tabbed medical file Victoria kept locked in her meticulously organized home office, I was the sole problem. The official paperwork she showed me stated I had severe male factor infertility. The doctors allegedly said there was practically 0 chance of natural conception, and even IVF would be a massive, expensive long shot. I spent my nights reading online support forums in the dark, feeling like I had fundamentally failed my wife, failed my family lineage, and failed at the one basic biological task a man is supposed to be able to perform naturally. I felt entirely broken. Then, right over dessert, Victoria loudly cleared her throat. She placed her heavy silver fork down with a sharp, echoing clink against the ceramic plate. The sound cut through the quiet room like a gunshot. She looked directly at my parents, Richard and Margaret. Then she looked over at my older brother Preston. Finally, her cold, calculating eyes landed squarely on me. She laid out her master plan with the cold, ruthless efficiency of a corporate lawyer delivering a lawsuit. She stated that we were completely out of liquid cash for further expensive IVF treatments. She declared that the standard adoption process was entirely too expensive, required too many invasive background checks, and took way too many years to finalize. Then, she casually suggested traditional surrogacy, but with a highly specific, deeply disturbing twist. She wanted a sperm donor, but she adamantly stated she did not want an anonymous college student from a random, sterile sperm bank. She wanted someone whose medical history and genetic makeup we already knew and trusted. She wanted my brother. She wanted Preston to be the biological father of my child. The silence that immediately followed her statement was absolutely deafening. I literally stopped breathing. My lungs refused to take in oxygen. I slowly looked over at Preston. He was sitting at the head of my table, swirling an expensive glass of my best bourbon, trying and completely failing to hide a massively arrogant smirk. My brother, the ultimate golden child. The man who had absolutely everything in life handed to him on a silver platter since the day he was born. I fully expected my parents to be instantly outraged. I fully expected my father to slam his heavy hand on the dining table and shut down this incredibly inappropriate and highly offensive suggestion immediately. I expected my mother to tell Victoria she was crossing a massive, unforgivable boundary. I waited for the defense that never came. Instead, my father nodded slowly, rubbing his chin as if he were evaluating a solid commercial real estate investment. My mother leaned forward across the table, her eyes lighting up with genuine, sickening excitement as she delivered that crushing line about Preston having strong genes and keeping the family legacy pure. She actually smiled. She smiled while actively participating in the complete emasculation of her youngest son. I felt all the blood drain completely from my face. I could not form a single coherent word. My own family was casually negotiating the reproductive rights to my marriage right in front of me, treating my wife like a communal vessel and my older brother like a prize-winning stallion. Victoria reached across the heavy mahogany table and placed her freezing cold hand directly over mine. She squeezed my fingers tightly. She told me it was the only logical step left for us if we wanted a family. She said it was just basic biology, a simple clinical transaction to give us the family we had always desperately dreamed about. She actually had the audacity to say I should be deeply grateful we had a willing family member to keep the medical costs down. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. I excused myself from the table without raising my voice. I walked straight out the back glass door and onto the wooden deck, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned completely white. The profound betrayal tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. I felt entirely alone in the world. I had told them I needed some time to think about this massive, life-altering decision. I played the part of the shocked, grieving, inadequate husband perfectly. But as I stood there in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of their cheerful, relaxed conversation continuing inside my own house, a tiny, nagging voice in the back of my mind told me something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. Victoria was way too calm during her pitch. She did not stumble over her words. Preston was entirely too smug and completely unsurprised. My parents were way too agreeable way too quickly. I realized right then and there that this was absolutely not a spontaneous, desperate suggestion born out of marital frustration. This was a highly rehearsed pitch. They had all discussed this before I ever sat down at that table. And I was the only person in the room who did not have the script. I thought the absolute worst part of my life was the infertility diagnosis. I thought the pain had officially peaked. I was so incredibly wrong, and the real nightmare was just beginning. To truly understand the absolute, unhinged insanity of that Sunday dinner, you have to fully understand the incredibly toxic dynamic of my family. I was born into a fierce, unspoken competition I was never officially informed I was playing. Preston is exactly 3 years older than me, and in the deeply biased eyes of Richard and Margaret, he is the undisputed king of the universe, incapable of making a single mistake. Our entire childhood was a daily masterclass in blatant, unapologetic favoritism. While I worked exhausting double shifts stocking heavy shelves at a local hardware store just to put myself through a standard state college and avoid crippling student loan debt, Preston had his entire expensive private university tuition paid in full. My parents had secretly set up a massive college fund only for him. When I found out and confronted them, they simply told me building strong character through hard physical work was essential for my personal development, whereas Preston needed a clear, stress-free mind to focus on his brilliant academic future. When I finally landed a solid, highly respectable job as a senior project manager at a major logistics company, earning a great salary, my parents offered a polite nod and a generic, store-bought congratulations card. When Preston got a mid-level promotion at his flashy downtown marketing firm, they threw a massive catered party, rented a hall, and invited half their country club to celebrate his alleged genius. The most glaring, obnoxious symbol of our massive financial and emotional disparity, was parked aggressively in my parents' driveway every single holiday. Preston drove a brand new, custom black Porsche. It was a sleek, loud machine that he bought shortly after finalizing his first messy divorce, which my parents completely funded for him. He loved to deliberately rev the engine whenever he pulled into the quiet neighborhood, making absolutely sure everyone within a 5-mile radius knew the golden child had officially arrived. He would constantly stroll through the front door, toss the heavy Porsche keys onto the granite kitchen counter, and make offhand, passive-aggressive comments about how extreme hard work pays off, always looking directly at me when he said it. My parents ate it up every single time. They called his raging arrogance drive. They called my stable salary and quiet life comfortable and average. When Victoria and I got married 5 years ago, I genuinely thought I was finally building a solid team of my very own. I thought I was creating a strong family unit that would prioritize me for once in my life. She was deeply ambitious, razor-sharp, and undeniably beautiful. But as the years passed and the spare bedroom down the hall remained completely empty, the very foundation of our marriage started to show severe structural cracks. We started seeing highly recommended, incredibly expensive fertility specialists in the city. The appointments were emotionally and physically grueling. I sat in countless sterile, bright white waiting rooms, reading outdated lifestyle magazines and feeling completely out of place. Victoria aggressively managed absolutely all the medical paperwork. She was the one who directly communicated with the busy clinics. She was the one who held onto the physical files, meticulously organizing them into color-coded binders. She repeatedly told me she wanted to take the heavy administrative burden off my shoulders because I was working so many extra overtime hours just to afford our high mortgage, the property taxes, and her increasingly lavish lifestyle. I believed her completely. I trusted my wife implicitly. I handed over complete control of my medical reality to a woman who was actively plotting my destruction. The official infertility diagnosis completely destroyed my self-esteem and my core sense of manhood. I stopped going to the gym. I stopped hanging out with my close friends on the weekends. I stopped caring about my hobbies. I just went to work, came home, and apologized profusely to my wife for being biologically defective. I watched her cry fake tears on the edge of our bed, and I hated myself for causing her that deep emotional pain. Looking back now, with perfectly clear eyes, the glaring signs of their manipulation were absolutely everywhere. A few weeks before the infamous dinner proposal, we hosted a large neighborhood barbecue in our backyard. Gregory, a guy I considered one of my closest and most trusted friends, cornered me by the grilling station while everyone else was eating. He had a cold beer in his hand and a very serious, highly calculating look on his face. He leaned in close and intentionally lowered his voice so the other guests could not hear our conversation. "Julian, man to man, I know you and Victoria are really struggling with the baby stuff," Gregory said, actively avoiding making direct eye contact with me. "Have you ever thought about keeping the whole process in the family? Maybe asking Preston for some biological help? It is actually not that uncommon these days to use a sibling to secure the genetics." I nearly dropped the metal tongs directly into the hot coals. I stared at him in utter disbelief. I told Gregory very clearly that he was completely out of his mind, that his suggestion was deeply offensive, and to never, ever bring it up to me again if he wanted to remain my friend. He quickly threw his hands up in a defensive gesture, muttered a quick apology, and walked away to grab another drink. I honestly thought he was just being an incredibly insensitive, drunk jerk. Now, the memory of that exact conversation makes my blood run completely cold. Gregory absolutely knew. He was deliberately testing the waters for them. He was a scout, sent to gauge my reaction before they launched the main offensive. The true trigger, the exact moment the heavy veil of deception began to violently lift, happened exactly 3 days after the Sunday dinner proposal. It was a random Tuesday night. I woke up around 2 in the morning, dying of extreme thirst. The space beside me in our large bed was completely empty. I assumed Victoria was just getting a glass of water from the kitchen. I walked out into the dark hallway and saw a tiny sliver of yellow light coming from beneath the heavy wooden door of the guest room. As I got closer, I heard Victoria's voice. It was not her normal conversational tone. It was a hushed, frantic, highly irritated whisper. I know, she hissed angrily into her phone. I pitched it exactly like we practiced it. He is in shock right now, but he is fundamentally weak. He will cave eventually. Your mother already planted the brilliant seed about keeping the strong bloodline intact. We just need to give him a few more days to emotionally process it before we push the legal paperwork for the clinic. I stopped breathing entirely. The hardwood floorboards beneath my bare feet felt like they were actively disintegrating into dust. No, you absolute idiot, Victoria continued, her voice dripping with sheer venom and intense irritation. We cannot tell him yet. The timeline has to match the fertility clinic schedule perfectly, or he will do the math. Just keep your mouth shut. Stop panicking about the details, and let me handle my pathetic husband. She hung up the phone with a sharp, aggressive click. I crept silently back into our master bedroom, slipped silently under the heavy covers, and stared unblinking at the ceiling until the sun finally came up. My wife was actively conspiring with someone. She was meticulously coordinating a timeline. She specifically said he would do the math. I did not need an expensive private investigator to tell me exactly who was on the other end of that late-night phone call. The ugly puzzle pieces were rapidly falling into place, forming a picture so horrifying and disgusting I could barely comprehend it. I realized instantly that if I confronted her right then in the dark, she would lie directly to my face. She would aggressively gaslight me, tell me I was hearing things in my sleep, tell me my deep grief over the infertility was making me clinically paranoid. I needed solid proof. I needed undeniable, concrete, legally binding proof that would stand up in front of a judge during a vicious divorce settlement. I kissed her on the forehead the next morning before leaving for my corporate office, exactly like I always did every single day. I told her to have a wonderful day and that I loved her. But as I backed my car out of our driveway, looking at our beautiful real estate, I knew my marriage was already completely dead. The massive storm was rapidly approaching, and I was going to make absolutely sure they were standing right in the dead center of it when the lightning finally struck. I immediately called my boss and took a personal sick day from work. Instead of heading to my corporate office, I drove straight across town to the expensive fertility clinic Victoria had been exclusively using for the past year. It was a high-end, incredibly luxurious facility located right downtown, the kind of place with imported white leather chairs, expensive abstract art on the walls, and a massive indoor water feature in the main lobby designed to calm wealthy, anxious patients. I walked straight up to the massive marble reception desk. The main nurse on duty was a young woman named Nora. I recognized her immediately from our first few initial consultations years ago. "Good morning, Nora," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady, low, and strictly professional. "I am Julian. I need to formally request a full, unredacted copy of my personal medical records. The complete file, please, including all lab results and doctor notes." Nora looked up from her dual computer screens. For a split second, sheer, unfiltered panic flashed violently across her face. Her hand actually visibly trembled as she reached for her computer mouse. "Oh, hi Julian," she stammered, her voice suddenly an octave higher than normal. "Victoria usually handles all the record requests and administrative duties for your file. Let me just give her a really quick phone call to authorize the release of—" "I am the patient, Nora," I interrupted, leaning slightly over the cold marble counter. My voice was incredibly calm, but there was absolutely no warmth, patience, or room for negotiation in it. "Those are my personal medical records. Federal HIPAA regulations strictly mandate that I have immediate and unrestricted access to my own health information upon request. Do not call my wife. Print the entire file right now, or I will be contacting my lawyer before I leave this lobby." Nora swallowed hard. She clicked rapidly on her screen, walked over to the large commercial printer in the corner of the office, and handed me a thick, heavy manila envelope without ever making direct eye contact with me again. I did not open the envelope in the clinic lobby. I walked quickly back to my parked car, locked all the doors, and physically tore the thick envelope open. I flipped past the standard blood work results, the complicated insurance forms, and the general intake questionnaires until I finally found the lead specialist's final diagnostic report. I read the printed words 3 times. My brain simply refused to process the black ink on the white paper. According to Dr. Harrison, the highly respected, incredibly expensive head of the clinic, my sperm count, motility, and morphology were not just completely normal, they were actually well above the average standard. The official medical report clearly and definitively stated, patient is 100% fertile. No reproductive anomalies detected. Excellent candidate for natural conception. I pulled out my smartphone and quickly accessed the shared digital portal where Victoria had always uploaded our medical documents for our health insurance claims. I opened the digital file labeled Julian_diagnosis. It was a heavily and sloppily edited PDF document. Someone had taken the clinic's official letterhead, completely altered the test numbers, and blatantly forged Dr. Harrison's signature to explicitly state that I had irreversible congenital sterility. For 3 long, agonizing years, I had deeply hated my own body. I had let my wife comfort me over a devastating medical condition she knew perfectly well I did not even have. I had let my parents treat me like damaged, defective goods. I had sacrificed my own mental health, my confidence, and my happiness at the altar of her massive, calculated lie. A cold, dark, incredibly calculating rage settled deep into my chest. I was not sad anymore. I was not grieving the loss of my marriage. I was highly dangerous. I knew Victoria had a standing acrylic nail appointment that afternoon that would take at least 2 full hours. I drove straight home, breaking the speed limit the entire way. I walked into her meticulously decorated home office and stared directly at the bottom drawer of her metal filing cabinet, the only single drawer she always kept securely locked. She had always firmly claimed it held old tax documents, sensitive 401k information, and highly confidential client files from her freelance consulting work. I immediately called a local emergency locksmith. I paid the man $200 in cash to pop the metal lock open, telling him I lost the key and ensuring he asked absolutely no questions about what I was doing. The bottom drawer did not contain any tax documents. It did not contain any client files or financial records. It contained a sleek, black burner phone hidden beneath a stack of blank printer paper. It was currently powered off. I plugged it into the wall charger, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. When the digital screen finally lit up, there was no passcode required. Victoria was incredibly arrogant. She truly never thought I would ever have the spine, the intelligence, or the suspicion to check on her. I opened the text messaging application. There was only one single contact saved in the entire phone, P. I sat down in her expensive leather desk chair and read through 6 full months of the most vile, heartless, and completely disgusting conversations 2 human beings could possibly have. Victoria, did the idiot buy the donor pitch last night? P. Hook, line, and sinker. He looked exactly like a kicked puppy. Your mom did great laying on the heavy guilt trip. She is a natural. Victoria, good. I am so sick of hiding in cheap hotels. When can we finally tell everyone the baby is mine? P. We absolutely must wait until the fake procedure at the clinic. We pretend the donor sperm took perfectly. Then we have a completely legitimate medical reason for the kid to look exactly like you. We can phase Julian out eventually. I get half the real estate in the divorce, I keep the house, and we get our family. I kept scrolling back in time, feeling physically sick to my stomach. I found dozens of pictures of them together in expensive downtown hotel rooms. Pictures of them drinking expensive wine in my own living room while I was working late at the office trying to earn money for our future. And then, I found the specific text message that completely shattered whatever tiny shred of restraint I had left in my body. Victoria, just got back from the private OBGYN. I am officially 7 weeks along. The heartbeat is incredibly strong. P. My son. I cannot wait to get that pathetic loser brother of mine out of the picture so I can claim exactly what is mine. She was already pregnant. The entire horrific Sunday dinner performance, the fake tears of sympathy, the outrageous suggestion of a family sperm donor. It was all an incredibly elaborate, deeply sick theatrical production solely designed to legitimize a pregnancy that had already successfully happened. They were actively using my home, my hard-earned salary, and my complete emotional destruction as a convenient smokescreen to cover up their disgusting, incestuous affair. And my parents completely knew. The realization hit me like a runaway freight train. The supportive comments at dinner, the college fund, the Porsche, the endless, sickening praise for Preston. They had always chosen Preston over me. And now they were actively, willingly helping him steal my wife and trick me into legally raising his bastard child, funding its entire life and college fund, until they were ready to discard me like absolute trash. I took out my own phone and took dozens of high-resolution photos of every single text message on that burner phone. I photographed the disgusting pictures. I photographed the real medical records right next to the fake ones. I immediately forwarded all the heavy evidence to a secure, encrypted cloud drive that absolutely only I had access to. Then, I put the burner phone exactly where I found it, arranged the paper perfectly, closed the heavy drawer, and pushed the metal locking mechanism firmly back into place. I walked out of that house a completely different man. Julian, the pathetic, infertile, supportive husband, was officially dead. I was going to burn their entire lives to the ground, and I was going to do it completely by the book, using the law and their own arrogance as my primary weapons. I desperately needed a strong ally. I needed someone on the inside who hated Victoria as much as I currently did. Someone who could help me navigate the fallout and the upcoming legal war. And I knew exactly who to call. Clara is Victoria's older sister. By absolutely every single metric that society values, Clara is vastly superior. She is a senior partner at a massive architectural firm, fiercely independent, brilliantly wealthy, and possesses a strong, unwavering moral compass that her younger sister completely lacks. Growing up, Victoria constantly lived in Clara's massive shadow. The deep, unspoken jealousy was a highly toxic undercurrent in their family dynamic. Victoria spent her entire adult life desperately trying to prove she was better, smarter, and more successful than Clara. I immediately called Clara and asked her to meet me at a very discreet, quiet coffee shop across town, far away from our neighborhood where anyone might recognize us. When I walked through the glass doors, she was already sitting in a dark corner booth, typing rapidly away on her expensive laptop. She looked up, her expression quickly shifting from a polite greeting to deep, genuine concern when she saw the dark bags under my eyes and the rigid posture of my body. "Julian, what is wrong? You look like you haven't slept in a week," she said, slowly closing her laptop and pushing it aside. I did not say a single word at first. I simply sat down across from her, pulled my phone from my jacket pocket, and opened the digital album titled The Truth. I slid the phone slowly across the wooden table to her. I sat in absolute silence and watched Clara's eyes dart rapidly back and forth across the glowing screen. I watched her perfectly manicured hand fly up to cover her mouth in absolute shock. I watched the color completely drain from her beautiful face as she read the vile texts, saw the hotel photos, and finally looked at the forged medical report alongside the real, official one. "Oh my God," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with absolute, unfiltered disgust and rage. "Julian, she is a monster. She is actually a complete sociopathic monster. And your own brother, your parents, they are all really in on it? They all helped her do this to you. They are all in on it?" I confirmed, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and hollow. "She is already pregnant, Clara. They are actively trying to trick me into signing legally binding documents acknowledging the child is mine through a donor process, just to cover their tracks until they are ready to serve me with divorce papers and steal my assets, my real estate, and my dignity." Clara handed the phone back to me, her eyes suddenly flashing with a cold, highly protective fury. "What do you want to do? Because if you want to walk into that house right now and burn it straight to the ground, I will gladly light the match for you. I will hire the best lawyer in the state and ruin her." "No," I said, leaning forward, matching her intense energy. "If I confront her right now, she will instantly play the ultimate victim. She will cry and spin it to her friends. Preston will hire a high-powered lawyer, and my wealthy parents will happily fund her legal defense just to protect their golden child from a massive public scandal. I will easily lose half my assets, my retirement 401k, and I will be tied to them in a bitter, drawn-out court battle for years over custody of a child that isn't even mine. I need to dismantle them strategically. I need your help, Clara. Clara did not hesitate for even a single second. Tell me exactly what you need me to do. I am in. We formulated a brilliant, airtight plan right there in that little coffee shop. Clara would act as my eyes and ears on her side of the family. She would subtly encourage Victoria's massive arrogance, acting incredibly supportive of the upcoming pregnancy, making absolutely sure my wife felt entirely secure in her twisted master plan. I drove home that evening and walked into the bright kitchen. Victoria was casually chopping vegetables for dinner, humming a cheerful, upbeat tune. The sight of her domestic performance made me physically want to vomit. I walked up behind her and gently placed my hands on her shoulders. I felt her stiffen slightly for a second before intentionally relaxing into the physical touch. "Victoria," I said, intentionally letting my voice crack just a little bit, perfectly playing the role of the broken, defeated, desperate husband who was finally giving up the fight. "I have been thinking a lot about Sunday, about what you and my parents proposed regarding Preston." She quickly turned around, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes wide with feigned innocence and desperate hope. And you are entirely right?" I sighed heavily, looking down at the kitchen floor as if I were carrying the weight of the world. "I just want a family with you. I want you to be happy. If Preston is really willing to do this huge favor for us, I am completely on board. Let's do it." The massive, triumphant smile that spread across her face was the most chilling, genuinely evil thing I have ever seen in my entire life. She threw her arms around my neck and hugged me tightly, pressing her body against mine. "Oh, Julian, thank you. Thank you for being so incredibly strong. You are making the best decision for our future. I will call the clinic first thing tomorrow and set up the legal paperwork for the transfer." "Take your time," I murmured softly into her shoulder, staring blankly at the wall behind her. "I trust you completely." With Victoria's guard completely lowered, firmly believing she had successfully manipulated the village idiot, I went straight to work behind the scenes. I immediately called Marcus, my best friend from college and a ruthlessly efficient, highly aggressive financial advisor. We met at his downtown office long after normal business hours. I explained the entire horrific situation to him. Marcus did not offer me pointless pity or hollow platitudes. He offered pure, unadulterated financial strategy. Over the next 3 grueling weeks, we legally and very quietly untangled my personal finances from Victoria's. I funneled my large corporate bonuses, my upcoming salary promotion, and separate savings into a highly secure, untouchable trust that she could absolutely not touch in a standard divorce proceeding. We carefully reviewed the deed to the house, which, thankfully, I had purchased entirely before we were legally married, keeping it solely in my name despite her constant, nagging demands over the years to be added to the mortgage for security in case of a funeral. I also met secretly with a vicious, highly rated divorce attorney, providing him with the overwhelming evidence of the adultery, the medical fraud, and the calculated conspiracy to commit paternity fraud. We aggressively drafted a massive lawsuit that would not just end the marriage on my terms, but completely and financially devastate both Victoria and Preston, leaving them with absolutely nothing. Every single night, I went home and listened patiently to Victoria talk excitedly about prenatal vitamins, nursery colors, and fake clinic appointments. I smiled warmly. I rubbed her back when she complained of aches. I played the absolute perfect, deeply supportive husband. The stage was finally set for the ultimate destruction. Victoria decided she wanted to host a massive family dinner to officially celebrate the successful implantation. She proudly invited my parents. She invited Preston. She had absolutely no idea that I had also personally invited Clara. And she had absolutely no idea that this celebratory dinner was going to be a brutal, unforgettable public execution. The morning of the massive celebratory dinner felt entirely surreal, like I was physically walking through a perfectly constructed movie set of my own life. The crisp, cool autumn air outside our pristine suburban home was a very sharp contrast to the suffocating, highly toxic atmosphere that was rapidly brewing inside the house. Victoria was practically vibrating with a sickening level of manufactured excitement from the moment she woke up. She was up at 6 in the morning, aggressively cleaning granite countertops that were already completely spotless and arranging expensive, imported floral centerpieces she had custom ordered for the heavy mahogany dining room table. She even went out of her way to buy a ridiculously overpriced designer maternity dress from a high-end boutique downtown, even though she was barely 2 months along and absolutely not showing at all. She wanted to play the role of the glowing, wealthy expectant mother, and she was sparing absolutely no expense on my credit card to do it. I sat quietly at the large kitchen island, slowly sipping my black coffee, simply watching her perform this elaborate, sickening role. It was absolutely terrifying how easily the massive lies rolled off her tongue. She kept talking rapidly about how we needed to start looking into hiring a general contractor to completely convert my home gym into a fully equipped luxury nursery. She casually mentioned that since my salary was going to be stretched incredibly thin with the new baby expenses, the expensive diapers, and the future college fund, we might seriously need to look into dipping deeply into my personal retirement savings just to fund the extravagant lifestyle she firmly believed she and the new child deserved. I just nodded slowly and smiled, offering very vague agreements and taking another sip of my coffee. My mind, however, was miles away, locked safely inside the heavy leather briefcase sitting on the desk in my home office. That locked briefcase contained the finalized, ruthless divorce papers, the explosive civil lawsuit documents my highly aggressive lawyer had meticulously drafted, and a thick stack of high-resolution, color-printed photographs that would permanently end this disgusting charade tonight. By 4 in the afternoon, the entire house smelled of expensive roasted lamb, garlic herbs, and fresh rosemary. Victoria was upstairs in the master bathroom, spending 2 full hours doing her hair and makeup for an audience of exactly 3 people. I specifically took that quiet opportunity to walk into the main living room and adjust the massive 75-inch smart television mounted on the wall. I seamlessly connected my personal laptop to the screen, ensuring the wireless connection was completely flawless and testing the lag time. I opened the heavily encrypted cloud folder containing every single horrific text message and hotel photograph I had extracted from her hidden burner phone weeks ago. I carefully queued the images up in a smooth slideshow format, making sure the most damning texts were highlighted in bright yellow. The entire presentation was ready to be deployed with a single click of a small digital remote control currently hidden deep in my tailored jacket pocket. As I stood there looking at the blank screen, I felt a strange, icy calm wash over my entire physical body. I was no longer the broken, pathetic, infertile husband desperately seeking his family's elusive approval. I was the silent architect of their absolute destruction, and the demolition was scheduled for dinner. The front doorbell rang sharply at exactly 6 o'clock. My parents, Richard and Margaret, were the very first to arrive. My mother swept into the grand foyer wearing a ridiculously flashy, overly formal dress, holding a massive, expensive gift bag filled with high-end designer baby clothes. She immediately bypassed me in the hallway, offering only a brief, highly dismissive nod, and made a direct beeline straight for Victoria, who was elegantly descending the main staircase like royalty. My mother aggressively grabbed Victoria by the bare shoulders and kissed both her cheeks dramatically. She loudly proclaimed how incredibly radiant and fertile Victoria looked, entirely ignoring the fact that I, the supposed father, was standing right there in the shadow of the hallway. My father offered me a very stiff, formal handshake and muttered something entirely generic about the local weather and the current traffic on the interstate. They treated me like a minor, slightly inconvenient guest in my own house. They treated my expensive real estate like it was a communal family asset they were simply waiting to inherit or take over through their golden grandchild. Exactly 10 minutes later, the unmistakable, highly obnoxious roar of a high-performance sports engine echoed loudly through our quiet, strictly regulated HOA neighborhood. Preston had officially arrived. I stood entirely still and watched through the large front bay window as he aggressively parked his custom black Porsche halfway on my pristine green lawn, a blatant, arrogant display of total disrespect for my property. He stepped out of the expensive vehicle wearing a tailored designer suit that probably cost more than my first car, looking every single bit the arrogant, deeply entitled golden child my parents had meticulously created and funded. When Preston finally walked through the heavy front door, the entire dynamic in the room instantly shifted to revolve entirely around him. My mother rushed over to him, loudly fawning over his expensive suit and his recent haircut, asking him if he was getting enough sleep at his demanding job. My father clapped him heavily on the back, asking him detailed questions about his latest brilliant marketing campaign and his stock portfolio. But the absolute most sickening interaction of the evening was between Preston and Victoria. They shared a very long, lingering, highly inappropriate look right in front of my face. Preston stepped forward confidently and pulled my wife into a deep, overly familiar hug that lasted entirely too long. He placed his large right hand directly on her flat stomach and told her, looking her right in the eye, that she was doing an absolutely amazing job carrying the future of the family. The sheer audacity of his statement made the blood in my veins run completely cold. He was openly claiming his territory right in my living room, completely secure in the false, arrogant belief that I was entirely too weak, too desperate, and too stupid to see the truth right in front of my face. We all moved into the formal dining room and took our respective seats around the heavy mahogany table. I strategically placed myself at the absolute head of the table, with Victoria to my immediate right and Preston directly across from her. My parents sat adjacent to them, physically forming a cozy, tight little circle of complete deception. Just as Victoria was pouring the expensive red wine for the guests, making a massive show of sticking strictly to sparkling water for herself to maintain the perfect illusion of a healthy pregnancy, the front doorbell rang one final time. Victoria instantly frowned, looking deeply confused and slightly annoyed. She loudly stated she was absolutely not expecting anyone else and asked if I had ordered a delivery. I smiled warmly, stood up slowly from my heavy chair, and told her I had personally invited a very special surprise guest to help us properly celebrate our wonderful family milestone. I walked purposefully to the front door and opened it wide to reveal Clara. She looked absolutely breathtaking and highly intimidating, wearing a sharp, tailored navy blue blazer, expensive slacks, and exuding an aura of immense, quiet power. Clara and I shared a brief, silent look of absolute solidarity before we walked into the dining room together. The exact moment Victoria saw her older sister walk into the room, her entire physical demeanor violently shifted. Her fake, glowing maternal smile instantly fractured into a look of pure panic. Victoria deeply hated Clara. She hated Clara's immense financial success, her fierce independence, and her absolute refusal to cater to Victoria's constant drama and manipulation. Victoria immediately stood up and demanded to know exactly what Clara was doing here. She aggressively stated this was a highly private, intimate family dinner reserved only for the immediate bloodline. Clara smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile and gracefully took the empty seat right next to me at the table. She calmly and firmly stated that Julian had personally invited her, and since they were technically legal family, she would absolutely not miss this incredibly special medical announcement for the world. Clara's commanding presence completely threw off Victoria's perfect rhythm. Preston looked visibly annoyed by the sudden interruption, shifting uncomfortably in his chair, and my mother pursed her lips tightly in obvious, silent disapproval. The heavy dinner finally commenced, and the ongoing conversation was an absolute agonizing torture to endure. My parents spent the first full 30 minutes loudly discussing the massive college fund they were already planning to establish with their financial advisor for the new baby. They talked openly and enthusiastically about how the child would undoubtedly inherit Preston's natural athletic ability and my father's sharp business acumen. They completely erased me from the biological equation right to my face, practically treating me like a hired surrogate rather than a husband. Preston entirely dominated the conversation, bragging endlessly about his massive upcoming salary bonuses and his highly anticipated promotion at the downtown marketing firm. He looked directly across the table at me, swirling his wine, and told me I really needed to step up my game at work if I wanted to properly provide for his. He quickly caught himself and loudly corrected himself for our growing family. He smirked, taking a long, arrogant sip of his expensive wine. Victoria expertly played the role of the devoted peacemaker, placing her hand gently on mine and telling everyone at the table that Julian was doing his absolute best, even if his average salary was not quite as impressive as Preston's corporate income. The thick condescension in the room was so heavy you could physically cut it with a steak knife. They were utterly, completely trapped in the massive trap of their own blinding arrogance. They firmly believed they were the smartest people in the room. They believed their disgusting secret was completely safe. I carefully wiped my mouth with a white linen napkin. I looked slowly around the table at the faces of the exact people who had aggressively conspired to completely destroy my life, steal my hard-earned finances, and strip me of my basic human dignity. The time for playing the weak, infertile, highly supportive husband was officially over. I reached my right hand deep into the inside pocket of my tailored jacket and slowly pulled out the small digital remote control. I stood up slowly from my heavy wooden chair. I picked up my crystal water glass and tapped it lightly with a silver dessert spoon. The sharp, clear ringing sound instantly silenced the entire room. Everyone stopped eating their lamb and looked up at me expectantly. Victoria beamed a massive, fake, highly encouraging smile, completely expecting a tearful, pathetic speech of profound gratitude for her sacrifice. I looked directly into my wife's calculating eyes, my face completely devoid of any emotion, and told her that tonight was indeed a night for absolute honesty, full disclosure, and complete transparency regarding the future of this family. The dining room was completely silent, save for the gentle, constant hum of the expensive central air conditioning unit blowing through the vents. I looked down at the expectant faces of my family. I did not feel a single ounce of fear, hesitation, or regret. I reached down to the hardwood floor beside my chair and lifted my heavy, locked leather briefcase directly onto the mahogany dining table. The loud, heavy thud made my mother physically jump in her seat and spill a drop of wine on the white tablecloth. "Julian, what on earth are you doing?" my father demanded, his voice thick with immediate irritation and utter disrespect. "Put your work bag away right now. We are eating an expensive dinner." I completely ignored his command. I popped the heavy brass latches with a loud click and opened the briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out 5 thick, heavy manila envelopes. I systematically tossed one directly in front of Victoria, one in front of Preston, and one in front of my parents. I kept the last 2 firmly gripped in my own left hand. I wanted to share some very important, highly sensitive medical documents with all of you tonight. I began, my voice dangerously calm, perfectly level, and entirely devoid of emotion. Since we are so openly and eagerly discussing the exact genetic makeup of the child currently growing inside my wife's stomach, I felt it was only fair and legally appropriate that everyone at this table had all the correct, verified scientific data. Victoria's fake, glowing smile completely vanished in a millisecond. A look of genuine, unfiltered, raw panic flashed violently across her face. She reached out with physically trembling hands and slowly opened the flap of the heavy envelope. "You see," I continued, pacing slowly back and forth behind my heavy chair. "I recently paid a personal, unannounced visit to Dr. Harrison's luxury fertility clinic downtown. I wanted to fully understand the exact biological nature of my severe infertility before we finalized the highly binding legal donor paperwork. But the clinic gave me a very different medical report than the one Victoria had conveniently kept locked inside her home office filing cabinet for 3 agonizing years. Victoria pulled the thick stack of papers out of the envelope. I watched the blood rapidly drain from her face until her skin looked completely pale and sickly. Preston aggressively ripped his envelope open, his arrogant brow furrowing in deep, genuine confusion as he stared blankly at the dense medical terminology he clearly did not understand. "Read the heavily highlighted section at the bottom of the first page, Preston," I instructed sharply, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a physical blade. Read it out loud for the entire table to hear. Preston swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for an exit strategy. He aggressively shook his head and refused to speak. Fine, I will absolutely read it. Clara suddenly chimed in, her voice ringing with absolute authority and deep satisfaction. She leaned aggressively over the table, snatched the official paper directly out of Victoria's frozen hands, and read the bolded text loudly and clearly. Patient is 100% fertile. No reproductive anomalies detected. Sperm count, motility, and morphology are well above the average standard. Excellent candidate for natural conception. My mother gasped loudly, a dramatic, wheezing sound, her hand flying quickly to her chest. My father stared at me in total, bewildered shock, his mouth hanging slightly open. That is entirely correct, I stated, looking directly into Victoria's completely terrified eyes. I am perfectly healthy. I have always been perfectly healthy. My loving, highly devoted wife completely forged a fake medical document on her computer, actively altered my official lab results, forged a doctor's signature, and aggressively gaslit me into believing I was biologically defective for 3 agonizing years. And she did it for one specific reason, to cover up a massive, disgusting, unforgivable lie. Julian, no. This is a terrible mistake. Victoria finally shrieked, her voice cracking in pure, unadulterated desperation as she stood up. The clinic must have completely mixed up the files. I would never, ever do that to you. You have to believe me. I love you. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my jacket pocket, pointed my hand at the living room, and pressed the button on the small digital remote. Instantly, the massive 75-inch smart television in the adjacent living room flared brightly to life. Everyone's head whipped around violently to look at the massive screen. Displayed in high-definition text, blown up so large it was impossible to miss, was a screenshot of the digital conversation between Victoria and the contact saved strictly as P. I pressed the button again, advancing the terrifying slideshow. A high-resolution, incredibly clear photograph of Victoria and Preston kissing passionately in a downtown luxury hotel lobby filled the entire screen. Click. Another highly damning photograph of them drinking expensive wine on my own living room couch while wearing bathrobes. Click. The final, absolute killing blow text message appeared. Victoria, just got back from the private OBGYN. I am officially 7 weeks along. The heartbeat is incredibly strong. P. My son. I cannot wait to get that pathetic loser brother of mine out of the picture so I can claim exactly what is mine. The silence in the entire house was so absolute, so profoundly deep and heavy, it physically felt like all the oxygen had been completely sucked out of the room through a vacuum. My mother let out a low, horrifying, guttural wail and buried her face deeply in her hands. My father's face turned a dangerous, alarming shade of dark purple. Preston physically slumped in his chair, looking like he was going to vomit right onto his expensive, untouched steak. You completely underestimated me, Victoria, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet, icy whisper. You actually thought I was weak. You thought I was stupid. You firmly thought you could use my stable salary to fund your lavish lifestyle, use my expensive real estate to securely house your bastard child, and use my absolute emotional destruction as a convenient, tragic smokescreen to legitimize your disgusting, incestuous affair with my own older brother. I turned my fierce gaze entirely to Preston. He desperately tried to puff out his chest, attempting to salvage some tiny, pathetic shred of his completely shattered ego. Julian, listen to me right now, Preston stammered loudly, holding his hands up defensively. It is not exactly what it looks like on that screen. We fell in love over time. We didn't want to hurt you. It just happened. Shut your damn mouth, I snapped, my voice echoing loudly and violently off the walls. You are an absolute pathetic coward, Preston. You always have been. You hid securely behind my parents' massive bank accounts your entire privileged life. You parked your leased Porsche on my front lawn today like you owned the place, acting superior, while secretly sleeping with my wife in cheap hotel rooms because you didn't have the basic spine to be a real man and face me. I turned my intense attention directly to my parents. They were staring at the glowing television screen in absolute horror. But I wasn't finished holding them accountable yet. "And you too," I said, the deep disgust evident in every single syllable I spoke. "Do not sit there at my table and pretend to be shocked by this horrific affair. I know exactly how this sick family operates. You supported her completely insane sperm donor idea without hesitation because you wanted to aggressively protect Preston. You wanted to keep his dirty little secret contained within the family unit to strictly avoid a massive public scandal at your country club. You were perfectly willing to let me unknowingly raise his child and completely drain my finances just to protect your precious golden boy from the consequences of his own actions." "That is absolutely not true, Julian," my father roared defensively, finally finding his voice and standing up forcefully from the table. "We had absolutely no idea they were sleeping together behind your back. We swear to God. It completely doesn't matter if you knew the specific details," Clara suddenly yelled, slamming her hands fiercely down on the mahogany table, making the wine glasses rattle. She stood up, towering aggressively over Victoria. "You created this arrogant monster. You praised Preston for absolutely everything and treated Julian like absolute garbage for decades. And you, Victoria," Clara said, her voice dripping with pure venom as she looked down at her sobbing sister, "you are the most disgusting, highly manipulative sociopath I have ever met in my life. You actively tried to destroy a good, honest man just to steal his hard-earned assets and play house with a narcissistic loser." Victoria burst into hysterical, completely uncontrollable tears, burying her face deeply in her arms on the table. She sobbed violently, begging loudly for forgiveness, claiming she was deeply confused, claiming she loved me. It was utterly pathetic and incredibly satisfying to watch. I reached into my heavy briefcase one final time and pulled out the remaining 2 thick envelopes. I tossed the first one directly onto Victoria's plate, right on top of her expensive, untouched lamb roast. "Those are the finalized, legally binding divorce papers, Victoria," I stated coldly. "My lawyer is completely vicious, and he has a massive mountain of concrete evidence proving extreme adultery, criminal medical fraud, and severe intentional emotional distress. You will absolutely not get a single dime of my salary or my savings. You will not get a single square foot of this real estate, which I completely protected legally before we even got married. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and leave my house, or I will have the local police physically remove you for trespassing." I took the second heavy envelope and threw it directly at Preston's chest. It hit him hard and fell to the hardwood floor. "And that document, Preston, is a massive civil lawsuit for intentional infliction of severe emotional distress and active participation in a conspiracy to commit medical fraud. I am going to legally drain every single dollar from your bank accounts. I am going to make absolutely sure your fancy marketing firm sees every single one of those vile text messages. You desperately wanted to be the man of this house? Congratulations. You are about to be completely broke." I looked slowly around the room one last time. The absolute devastation was total and complete. The perfect, suburban illusion was shattered into a million unfixable pieces. "This dinner is officially over," I said, pointing directly toward the heavy front door. "Get out of my house. All of you, right now." Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The immediate, explosive fallout from that disastrous dinner was a spectacular, incredibly violent implosion of absolutely everything Victoria and Preston had desperately tried to build. When you aggressively build a massive house completely out of lies and deception, it only takes one strong gust of absolute, undeniable truth to bring the entire structural foundation crashing down. And I did not just provide a tiny gust of wind. I brought a Category 5 legal hurricane straight to their respective doorsteps. True to my very strict word, Victoria was physically out of my house the very next morning before noon. She aggressively tried to stage a massive, dramatic sit-in on the living room floor, sobbing hysterically, throwing things, and refusing to pack her expensive designer clothes. She desperately threatened to call the local police and falsely claim I was being physically abusive to a pregnant woman. Unfortunately for her, I had already completely anticipated her psychotic, manipulative behavior. I had my highly aggressive lawyer standing by on speed dial, and I had quietly installed hidden security cameras in the main living areas weeks prior. When I calmly pulled out my phone and showed her the live recording device capturing her entire fake tantrum, her fake tears stopped instantly. She frantically packed exactly 2 large suitcases, threw them roughly into the trunk of her leased car, and drove away. She looked completely hollowed out, finally realizing she had absolutely no leverage left to use against me. Naturally, with nowhere else to go, she immediately moved into Preston's luxury downtown apartment. They foolishly thought they could finally just be together openly, playing the role of the tragic, deeply misunderstood victims of a cruel, unfeeling husband who kicked out a pregnant woman. But harsh reality is a remarkably effective teacher when you no longer have a stable financial cushion to comfortably fall back on. My lawyer moved with the ruthless speed and clinical precision of a military drone strike. The legal divorce proceedings were incredibly swift, completely brutal, and entirely one-sided. Because I had wisely and legally purchased the real estate long before our marriage, and because we had kept our major financial accounts largely separate thanks to my friend Marcus's advice, Victoria had zero legal claim to my home. Furthermore, in our specific state, the overwhelming, highly documented digital evidence of her severe adultery, combined with the criminal forgery of my medical records, completely obliterated any chance she had at securing spousal support or monthly alimony. She walked away from a 5-year marriage with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back, severe credit card debt, and a rapidly growing baby she now had to financially support entirely on her own. But the absolute sweetest, most deeply satisfying part of the revenge was sitting back and watching Preston's golden, untouchable world completely disintegrate into ashes. The massive civil lawsuit I officially filed against him for emotional distress and fraud was a highly public nightmare. It aggressively dragged his pristine, carefully curated name through the legal mud for months. But the real, devastating killing blow to his ego came from an entirely unexpected source. Sylvia, a highly influential, incredibly wealthy VIP client at Preston's downtown marketing firm, caught wind of the escalating legal drama. Sylvia was a fiercely loyal, old-school businesswoman who highly valued absolute integrity above all else, and she actively despised messy, highly public scandals associated with her brand. When Sylvia casually inquired about the disturbing rumors swirling around her primary account manager, a disgruntled lower-level employee quietly showed her a few of the leaked details regarding Preston sleeping with his own brother's wife and actively forging medical documents. Sylvia was absolutely disgusted by the severe lack of ethics. She immediately pulled her massive, multi-million-dollar corporate account from the marketing firm, explicitly citing Preston's severe lack of moral character, basic untrustworthiness, and terrible judgment as the sole reason for her departure. The firm's senior partners did not hesitate for a single second. Preston was unceremoniously fired the very next morning. They completely stripped him of his massive 6-figure salary, his highly anticipated generous corporate bonuses, and his prestigious title. Without his high income stream, his lavish, heavily financed lifestyle collapsed like a house of cards in a violent windstorm. Within exactly 3 short months of losing his job, the bank officially repossessed the custom black Porsche. I actually took a slightly longer route home from work one afternoon just in time to see the heavy commercial tow truck physically hauling his precious symbol of absolute arrogance away down the busy downtown street. It was, without a single doubt, one of the most incredibly satisfying sights I have ever witnessed in my entire life. The immense financial stress immediately began to poison Victoria and Preston's toxic, fragile relationship. Clara, who remained my staunch ally and closest confidant throughout the entire ordeal, took immense pleasure in keeping me updated on their miserable, rapid downward spiral. According to Clara's network, Victoria and Preston were engaging in massive, screaming fights that shook the thin walls of their apartment every single night. Preston fiercely blamed Victoria for the complete loss of his prestigious career, his beloved car, and his pristine reputation in the city. He screamed at the top of his lungs that her sloppy, amateur medical forgery was the exact reason they were in this terrible mess. Victoria viciously blamed Preston in return for not fighting harder in court and for completely failing to provide the luxurious, carefree lifestyle he had explicitly promised her when he convinced her to destroy our marriage. When the baby was finally born, the harsh, unforgiving reality of their situation fully set in. There was no massive college fund waiting for the child. There were no lavish, fully catered parties to celebrate the birth at the country club. They were struggling heavily just to pay for basic diapers, formula, and the monthly rent on a downtown apartment they could no longer afford on zero income. Preston, predictably, proved to be an entirely useless, highly absent father, exactly the kind of man who likes the absolute idea of a legacy but deeply despises the actual hard work, sleepless nights, and sacrifice of genuine parenting. Desperate, facing eviction, and completely out of options, Preston turned to the only people who had ever blindly bailed him out of his terrible mistakes: our aging parents. Richard and Margaret were forced by their own overwhelming guilt to drastically liquidate a massive portion of their retirement 401k and severely dip into the inheritance they had proudly built over decades just to keep their golden child out of total, devastating bankruptcy. The extreme financial strain deeply aged them both. The proud, arrogant parents who had casually laughed at my deep pain during that Sunday dinner were now entirely, legally chained to a miserable, financially ruined son and a daughter-in-law they secretly despised. They got exactly what they always wanted. They got to keep Preston in the family, entirely dependent on them forever. As the heavy, toxic dust from the massive emotional explosion finally began to settle, I found myself standing in the absolute quiet of my own home. For the very first time in 3 long, agonizing years, I could finally breathe deeply without feeling a crushing, suffocating weight of deep inadequacy pressing down heavily on my chest. I wasn't biologically defective. I wasn't emotionally broken. I was entirely free. The healing process was absolutely not an overnight miracle. It required deep, highly intentional work every single day. I started going back to the gym religiously, channeling my lingering anger and deep betrayal into lifting heavy weights until the sheer physical exhaustion completely washed away the loud mental noise in my head. I actively reconnected with the loyal, supportive friends I had actively pushed away during the dark years of the fake infertility crisis. I threw myself passionately and aggressively into my career at the logistics firm, taking on massive new corporate projects with a renewed, laser-like focus. Without the constant, draining emotional vampire of Victoria sucking away my energy every single night, my professional life absolutely skyrocketed. Within 8 months of the finalized legal divorce, I secured a massive promotion to regional director, complete with a substantial salary increase that secured my financial future indefinitely and completely replenished the funds I spent on the lawyers. But the most beautiful, entirely unexpected part of my completely new life was my rapidly evolving relationship with Clara. We absolutely didn't rush into anything romantic. Our initial connection grew strictly out of shared trauma and a mutual, deep disgust for the horrible people who had completely betrayed both of us. We spent countless late nights sitting outside on my back deck, drinking cheap wine and simply talking for hours about our lives, our career goals, and our individual boundaries. Clara was completely different from Victoria in every conceivable way. She was fiercely honest, incredibly grounded, and she never, ever tried to manipulate my emotions to get her way or win an argument. She completely respected my space, and I deeply respected her fierce independence and intelligence. Slowly, incredibly organically, that deep foundation of mutual respect and absolute trust blossomed into genuine, profound love. There was absolutely no pressure, no hidden agendas, and absolutely no rushing toward arbitrary societal milestones like marriage or having children immediately. We just truly enjoyed the quiet peace of being together, completely free from the toxic drama that had previously defined our lives. Of course, The absolute silence from my toxic family eventually broke. About a full year after the massive fallout, long after Preston had completely drained their financial resources, I heard a timid, hesitant knock on my heavy front door. I opened it to find my parents standing awkwardly on the front porch. They looked incredibly frail, deeply tired, and severely humbled by the brutal reality of their terrible choices. My father was wringing his hands nervously, looking down at his shoes. My mother looked at the floor, absolutely unable to make direct eye contact with me. "Julian," my father started, his voice cracking slightly with genuine emotion and deep regret. We want to sincerely apologize. We made a terrible, completely unforgivable mistake. Preston has completely ruined everything we built. He is so incredibly angry all the time, and Victoria is making our lives a living hell with her demands. We deeply miss you, son. We desperately want to make things right. We want to be a real family again. I stood in the doorway, looking closely at the two people who had so easily and callously discarded me when they thought I served absolutely no purpose to their grand family legacy. I didn't feel any burning anger anymore. I didn't feel hatred. I just felt a profound, deep pity for them. "I am absolutely not your backup plan," I said, my voice incredibly calm, perfectly steady, and entirely devoid of any residual anger. "You made your definitive choice years ago, and you loudly confirmed that terrible choice at my dining room table. You chose the fake illusion of perfection over your own son. You actively chose to protect a narcissistic abuser instead of defending the clear victim. I have spent the last entire year meticulously rebuilding my life, my career, and my peace, and I absolutely refuse to let that toxicity back into my home ever again. Please, Julian, we are your parents. You cannot just cut us off forever. Think about the family funeral arrangements in the future. Think about custody. Think about the legacy." My mother cried out, reaching a physically trembling hand out toward my arm in a desperate plea. I stepped backward firmly, establishing the physical and emotional boundary. "You are absolutely not my family anymore. My family is the people who actively protect me, who respect me, and who tell me the hard truth. You don't actually want a son. You just want a convenient escape hatch from the nightmare you actively helped create. Do not ever come to this house again. Do not call me. If you do, I will involve my lawyer." I closed the heavy wooden door quietly but firmly, hearing the deadbolt lock click securely into place. I walked back into the bright, warm kitchen where Clara was making fresh coffee. She looked at me, a silent, highly supportive question in her beautiful eyes. I simply smiled, kissed her gently on the forehead, and poured myself a hot cup. I was finally truly home. Sometimes the absolute greatest revenge is not completely destroying your enemies in a dramatic fashion. The greatest, most satisfying revenge is permanently removing their access to your light, your energy, and your massive success. They are forcefully made to live in the dark, miserable reality they created for themselves, while you get to step out into the bright sunshine and build a life they can absolutely never, ever touch. I truly thought I needed their validation to be a real man. Turns out, walking away from them permanently was the most masculine, highly powerful thing I have ever done in my entire life. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own toxic family members? Have you ever had to draw a hard, permanent line in the sand to protect your own peace, your salary, and your future? Share your incredible story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Thank you for listening.